Over 200 known sunken sites in the Mediterranean alone, and including obelisks, cities underwater, over 200 sunken sites. And so that also indicates that they were built before the Mediterranean Sea was, had completely flooded the Mediterranean as it has today.
Jonathan, what is it that is so fascinating to mankind, about these sunken cities?
If you think of it symbolically, archetypally, psychologically, if there are structures near us but unseen, deep in the water, deep below, perhaps there are structures deep in us, below the seen, below the conscious, deep below. So I would not only be interested historically and archaeologically, but symbolically, that there are things for us to learn about ourselves, about our own world, familiar areas close at hand where you may have taken a cruise ship right over that spot in the past, and unseen, waiting for us to learn from, are structures from ancient times.
And Eric, tell us about Dwarka in India, the city of Dwarka.
I don't know much about it. I just know that there was a city, and in the Mahabharata, in the 5th book, which is the name Mausala, they write about the terrible war, that they were fighting against each other, the gods against the humans against the gods against each other, etc. And they destroyed the city. And in the meantime, we find the remains of it under the Indian Ocean. So these structures are there. By the way, in the Mediterranean Sea, you just said there are many of them. I know at least 3 of them, definitely. In the Atlantic Sea, the same thing. In French Brittany, you know some of these megalithic lines, these stones, they go underwater. You can prove it. Which brings up to a political question of today. Definitely, some thousands and thousands of years ago, we had a climate change. Definitely. So, but at that time, there were no 7 billion humans. There was no pollution by our cars and our industries, but we had a climate change. So, be careful what the reason for the climate change is.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. Not to go off on climate change as that particular argument, but that's exactly right. Our star is a variable star. It's changing in brightness all the time, and it's going to cause us to go through ice ages and warm periods and so on. But then there are other influences that drastically change our climate. Asteroids and near-Earth objects have hit the Earth over the eons many times, and we think that an asteroid may be what caused the Dark Ages, for example. And if a large asteroid like a Childress hits, it's going to change the continental structure because of giant tsunamis that it is created by it. And it could be what caused England not to be connected to the rest of Europe. It could be things that cause, like Madagascar, not to be connected to Africa. And that's an impact from outside, and that is a climate change.
Mm-hmm. Well, and, I want to mention here about the ice ages there. We don't know, and geologists, don't have a good answer for ice ages, what creates them, why they suddenly the ice melts and disappears. During the last ice age, 10,000 years ago or so, 12,000, geologists say that ocean levels throughout the Atlantic and the Pacific, Indian Oceans, they were 300 to 400 feet lower, the ocean levels. And if you lower the ocean levels 300 to 400 feet in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, or in the Indian Ocean, you're going to create mini continents out of the Azores, out of the Bahamas, out of the other Caribbean islands, and including Cuba. All the ocean shorelines of every continent would be completely different. And in the Pacific as well. The Pacific island areas, including Hawaii, Tonga, French Polynesia, Samoa, New Zealand even Easter Island, they would become mini continents, and oceanic mini continents, and any structures that weren't built on the top of the mountains would today be 300, 400 feet deep in the ocean. And you need a submarine to go that deep to look for those.
Another fascinating underwater phenomenon is on the island of Malta. On the island of Malta, on high hills, we have so-called cart ruts carved into the ground. There are these parallel grooves that are clearly cut into the ground, and one area is called Clapham Junction, which is a train station in London, and it's a big train station with many tracks and switches, and that's exactly what these cart ruts look like. And 2 examples of these cart ruts actually go deep into the Mediterranean as far as 11 miles or 11 kilometers. So you have to ask yourself, what were these cart ruts made for? And second of all, well, why did they carve it into the water? Or, as we were all establishing now, at some point the ocean levels were lower, and that's why we have things underwater right now.
If I could chime in for a quick second, I think one of the major impediments that we have in Western civilization for believing in all of these ancient civilizations is simply because many people come to a reading of the Bible in the book of Genesis, interpreting it literally, and therefore interpret human civilization only 5,000-6,000 years old. And therefore, of course, there cannot be these ancient civilizations. That's all, whatever one wants to call it. But that's the problem. People are not interpreting and understanding Genesis correctly, and they never have. So when you go into the ancient legends of how Genesis was truly understood, and recognize some of the codes that it describes specifically in the Kabbalah. We were talking about this, if you remember, the other day in the book of the Zohar. Well, there's a section of the Kabbalistic book of the Zohar called the Hashmatut, which means the omissions. So if you go and look for the book of the Zohar, you're not going to find these other than the original Aramaic. And it speaks about the pre-Adamic civilizations, the existence that existed before Adam in the Bible, and describes them as being very highly advanced human civilizations here on Earth, and that they had their own imbalances, socially, politically, economically, which again interacted with natural disasters, which changed the face of the Earth, essentially almost wiping them out. Maybe this is what is our ancient legends of Atlantis and Lemuria. I don't think those were necessarily exclusive individual islands, as much as a global culture that has been lost. So from my religious, spiritual, Kabbalistic point of view, when I hear you and Eric and David and others talking about these ancient places, personally I don't know of them. However, I'm not surprised or shocked by them. I would expect them to be found, and probably many others.
You know, that is very refreshing to hear that from you.
Well, this is the point why I'm on the panel, actually. It's not because I want to add a personal point of view. This is not my personal point of view. This is scholarship. It's out there for anyone who wants to find it.
So what I meant by that is that I'm happy that you agree that the world is not 6,000 years old.
Well, that's exactly right. The Bible never taught that. That's exactly the point. We speak of, literally, this is a secret based upon a code in the book of Genesis chapter 36, that these were the kings who ruled in the land of Edom prior to there being a king in the land of Israel. Who cares about a genealogy of ancient kings? It's irrelevant, superfluous. But when you recognize that it was a code speaking about the pre-Adamic civilizations and how they rose and fell, and it wasn't just one, that opens up the avenue of all these things. And you know, the whole concept of the buried cities, the lost civilizations, this is something which has become very much part and parcel in our public media today. I'll share with you a little thing here. I'm a very big fan of the old Godzilla movies. I've been watching Godzilla movies. So, yeah, I think he's the biggest guy on the screen. What can I say? And they came out with the recent Godzilla film just last month. And of course, Godzilla's fighting all the monsters and all the rest, but he gets hurt in a fight. And what happens is he retreats under the oceans to inner Earth. And a submarine goes after him, and they discover the ancient buried cities. They show you the monolithic statues, the pyramids and the like. And I'm saying, wait a second. I've seen every Godzilla film that's ever been made. They never showed that. They introduced this to show us, to introduce into the collective consciousness these ideas. And we really need to understand that you should never ever look to the Bible and use that as an excuse to contradict the reality of that which we see and know.
Well, we're on movies.
I like to think that we
something if we follow where the imagination goes, where popular culture takes over some of these bits of research. We have two movies, not recent. One was called The Abyss, one was called The Sphere, and they both represent what we might imagine is happening in terms of visitation and the oceans. And they were both ancient visitations that were waiting at the bottom of the ocean for us to make contact with. I don't know if there is a sphere down in the ocean someplace. I know we are waiting for contact.
Yeah, and it's really intriguing is that, you know who has gone the deepest in the ocean? James Cameron. He holds the record, actually. And he's built a submarine that can take him, he went down like, yeah, so he didn't get all the way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, but he got like 2 miles or something like that, which is the record. But think about it this way. It's the same argument I'll use that when a former president said, "Oh, the moon, been there, done that." The moon is really big, and 12 guys walked on the moon, and there's a rule, a safety rule, that they couldn't go further away than 3 kilometers radius from the landing point, because if the lunar rover died, they had plenty of air, but their battery packs would run out and they'd freeze to death before they could get back. So that's the maximum distance they can travel. So now if you take 6 trips to the moon where there's a circle only 3 miles in radius, we've looked at 0.0000062% of the lunar surface. Right? And so now James Cameron has been to one really deep spot in the ocean. The ocean covers 75% or more of the surface of the Earth. We have no idea what's down there. And we have no idea if that was at the bottom of the ocean forever or not. I'll give you a perfect example. In my hometown, in Huntsville, Alabama, up on top of what we call a mountain, it's only like 1,500 feet high, but up on top of this mountain, there's a historical marker where an anthropologist or a biologist or whatever found fossils of diatoms. Diatoms are little doohickeys that live in the ocean. So how did they get there? You know, a 6-hour drive from any ocean and any away. How did they get up there? Well, most likely North Alabama was in the bottom of the sea at some point.
Similar to what we were saying, scientists are telling us that we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the oceans and what's under our own oceans on our own planet. And there can just be so much down there in the oceans, including incredible life, sea monsters and sea serpents, and I mean
Godzilla.
They're still out there.
Now, another interesting thing, when you go back into the same legends that speak about the pre-Adamic civilizations, they make it very clear that Noah was not the only survivor, that many of the ancients, the pre-Adamics, pre-Adamites as they're called, survived. And they survived under the oceans, in our Earth area. And especially when we talk about the extraterrestrial ideas and beliefs today, maybe many of them are not extraterrestrial coming from out there, but ultra-terrestrial coming from right here. That is the idea and the belief that's held in the Kabbalistic traditions.
Well, and think about one more thing. We know scientifically, it was discovered during the Cold War by nuclear submarines, that the underwater surface of the ocean shows that the magnetic field of the Earth flips. The North Pole, South Pole flips about every 100,000 years. We don't know if it's just the magnetic field flips, the entire Earth flips, the Earth's core flips. We don't know what causes this, but we know it happens. And so it's likely when that happens, there's some cataclysmic upheaval. And there may be tectonic shifting, who knows what. So it's possible that every 100,000 years, a great deluge happens, and the slate is wiped clean.
Right, and that's what's known in cataclysmic geology as a pole shift. A pole shift is when the Earth's crust itself is moving on the inner core and the mantle, and areas that are at the South Pole or North Pole actually shift towards the equator. This is the concept of pole shifts. Albert Einstein died with a manuscript of a pole shift on his desk that he was endorsing at the time. But yeah, if there is such a thing, these pole shifts, they are cataclysmic in nature. The Earth's crust is slipping forward. Areas covered with ice are suddenly near the equator, they're going to melt. But yeah, the tectonic plates of the Earth all are shifting. Volcanoes all over the world go off. There's massive tsunamis.
Dogs and cats sleeping together.
It's a cataclysm. Cataclysm.
From what I understand, these things can happen rather radically quick as well. It's not like it
It's very
centuries it
fast,
actually
right.
happened.
But we don't know for a fact that it happens very quick, but there has been an experiment done on the space shuttle back in the late 80s where they were doing this experiment. They built a little model of what they thought the floating tectonic plates would look like, and they spun it up in microgravity and they watched it. And the scientist, the astronaut that was doing the experiment, he said this is the best way to see this. He took a pair of wire cutting dikes, the little pliers about that long that have handles like this, and it's got the little bitty cutters like this, so it's an asymmetric doohickey, right? And he holds it in front of him and he spins it like this, and it starts spinning on its axis, and then after a while it flips over, keeps spinning. After a while longer, it flips over again, and it continued to do that until he reached up and grabbed it and put it back in his tool belt. And it was an example of how an asymmetric mantle or core could cause this spin flip. We don't know for sure that happens, but imagine if it does.
If you want to see physical evidence for the idea of a pole shift, or that not everything or not all countries that are in the position that they are today, a long time ago were in a different position, go and visit Switzerland. Go to Lucerne. There is a park called the Glacier Garden, and there you have fossilized evidence of palm trees in Switzerland, in Lucerne. Now, I grew up there. He knows this too. There are no real palm trees in Switzerland. So what does that mean? At one point, Switzerland was tropical, just like the Sahara was one of the most fertile lands on planet Earth, and today it is one of the biggest deserts.
Yes.
And Ariel, you brought up Atlantis, so I gotta ask, you guys, every few months we see articles on the web about researchers who have found what they believe is the true site of Atlantis. So I'll ask the panel, do we know where Atlantis might have existed?
Well, while many people want to point to it being a sunken continent in the middle of the Atlantic and claim that there's evidence of that, I think there's even more evidence that, well, I don't think we're in Atlantis right now, but we might be in Lemuria. I think that from a look at the ancient legends and teachings, the North American continent was considered to be the ancient source of civilization. It is actually spoken about in ancient Kabbalistic and Talmudic sources about the land on the other side of the waters. And there is archaeological evidence which validates an ancient Hebraic presence here in North America dating back 2,000, 2,500 years. They have the archaeological evidence of biblical Hebrew etched in stones. The mounds in Ohio have been opened, and they found a mummy which had an amulet which was written in biblical Hebrew. So these things are known, but the question is not so much about that. How did they know to come here? The answer is because these understandings and legends about the pre-Adamic civilizations have always been incorporated in the ancient Hebraic knowledge. Remember, the ancient Hebraic knowledge, where did it come from? Egypt. Where does Egypt get its knowledge from? Remember where Plato, Timaeus, Critias, he got it from an Egyptian priest. Moses, lack of a better term, was an Egyptian priest. So these knowledge, this connection has always been there from the source. So what is Atlantis? I don't know, but it was believed that it was here. But now I'll ask one other question. We all know from the Bible about the Great Flood, Noah. And the Bible says that Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. And before they closed off Mount Ararat, you can actually, if you remember the old In Search Of in the 1970s, they had plywood pictures of the real Ark. It looked like that. Where did Noah's Ark take off from? Where did he build his Ark? Mesopotamia. No, I don't think so. The legends say that he built his Ark in a civilization in a place, Book of Enoch, which was very much endowed with wisdom, knowledge, technology, and science. essentially Noah's Ark was built on and took off from what we would today call Atlantis.
On Atlantis, let me just say then, Atlantis has been placed in North America and the United States, exactly. There's so many books. They say there are more books written about Atlantis than any other subject, except for the Bible. And the Bible essentially talks about Atlantis too, which Ariel was saying.
Any other name?
Yeah, so Atlantis has been placed all over the world. It's been placed in Ohio and Virginia, the eastern United States, which is kind of what you were just saying. It's been placed in the Sahara Desert. It's been placed just off Brittany and Land's End in England. It's been placed in the Azores. It's been placed in Cuba. Mexico has Atlantis. Antarctica.
Well, see, the reason is, in my opinion, is because it's not just an island and a city-state. It was a global culture. So to find global culture everywhere, if we had an apocalypse and a disaster today, we would find the remnants of a McDonald's in Thailand, in Shanghai, in Africa, in Russia, all over the world. What does that say? Where was the source of the golden arches?
Plato said that the lost continent was beyond the gates of Hercules. That's the Straits of Gibraltar. So he's pointing out to the Atlantic Ocean. That's the sighting in the Azores. I think you were saying Bermuda. But anyway, it could be America. All we know is beyond. We don't know how far beyond. I want to chip in with one idea. I think Atlantis is a place in our hearts. That it is the lost glory days of some fine thing that happened before our time that perhaps with diligence and purity of heart we can get back to. If we look at it psychologically, we all yearn for something better, something that may have been lost. And Atlantis and other stories like it are wonderful representations of what are sometimes called Edenic places. The important thing about an Edenic fantasy or story is that we let ourselves search for it.
It's the lost golden age.
But that's actually what was referred to in the ancient times, especially in light of what's called the Kabbalistic teachings. The ancient civilization was considered a far more advanced, enlightened civilization that we have today. And I think that somehow we might have a genetic memory in the collective unconscious which remembers that, and like Professor Young is saying here, we seek it out. We know something was lost, and deep down within us, we're trying to get it back.
Well, I think in the abyss, it was in the Atlantic Ocean, right, pretty much. And in Stargate, you just had to dial 7th chevron and go to the Pegasus galaxy, and you realize that Atlantis was just a big city ship. It was a big spaceship, right? And it looked like what Plato described, and then they brought it back. It had some kind of warp capability, and they brought it back and landed it in the ocean, and it was an actual vessel that could go sink to the bottom. Geothermal energy to power it and all that kind of stuff. So, think outside the envelope. Maybe Atlantis was everywhere on the planet, if it was a real thing.
I don't think so, because in Plato, he clearly gives the measurement of Atlantis. He says how big it was, how many channels he had, how many harbors it had. We have the measurements of Atlantis. It's nothing in our heart. It did exist.
While it might have been everywhere, I mean, it could have moved itself. I didn't mean it was in one location. I mean, it might have been something like a floating city.
Well, and Plato talks about Atlantis being actually a canal city. It's concentric circles,
Exactly.
canals leading, and they had huge fleets of ships. Ultimately, as you went through these concentric canals, you ended up into the center of the city where there were huge buildings, the colophon, supposedly, and pyramids, and that there was a large, very high mountain to the north of Atlantis. This is all in Plato's two dialogues of Timaeus and Critias. That's where we get the story, and it's ultimately coming from Egyptian priests.
It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be an actual physical location and a place in the heart.
He's still like, no.
Fleet of ships. What do you think a fleet of ships does? It's not cruise ships. They're out there trading and spreading all around the globe. I believe the description of Timaeus and Critias most likely was passed down as some type of literal thing. So yeah, there probably was a city-state, a capital. But just because you have a capital, we have Washington, D.C., but our culture expands across the entire continent, as I'm sure Atlantis, whether it was in the middle of the Atlantic or on this continent, it spread out as well.
And that's a really good point. And I sometimes make a similar point. If there was some cataclysm in the near future, and then finally archaeologists went to Australia, and they're digging up Sydney, Australia, 10,000 years from now, and then they decide, well, these guys in Australia, they speak this weird language called English. And they say that their homeland is on the other side of the earth in this tiny island called Britain. And that they then colonized from this tiny island of Britain, they colonized this empty continent on the other side of the world. That seems so fantastic, doesn't it? Yet it's our history, and it's the history of Australia.
And every bit of that could be at the bottom of a future ocean.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And if it happened in the past, don't discount and think that because the Bible doesn't say, use that as an excuse to discount.
You know, Google Earth has this new function that allows you not only to see on land, but now under sea. This question's for Giorgio and for Eric. How might this new technology help us in finding more underwater secrets?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because I was telling people all weekend that by looking on the ocean floors with Google Maps, there is no lost continent. Geologists have not found one. There is no sunken thing. Otherwise, there would be a peak somehow. So it's the whole discussion of Atlantis is eternal.
But Atlantis was founded by Poseidon. Poseidon was one of the so-called gods, in my eyes, an extraterrestrial. Why has he founded Atlantis? Because he fell in love with a beautiful human girl, with Plato. And to protect his family, he founded Atlantis. So Atlantis did exist. It's not just an imagination or a spaceship or whatever. It was on Earth somehow. It was destroyed.
Who therefore found a very pretty girl. You know, that makes a little more sense to me.
Okay, it's time to open this up for your questions. If you have a question for our panelists, please do step up to the microphone here.
Gabriel, ask the first question.
Guys, please, when you come up, please keep your questions to the point. Tell us your name and get right to the question if you would. Thank you.
There you go.